Do you like it? Is it sweet?
I know someone sweeter.
Legend wasn't fantasy, and it was never intended to be marginalized as a benign children's fairy tale. It was Ridley Scott's effort to coalesce myth, dream, and nightmare on the screen, a dark fable that breathed and bled with the kind of raw power cinema alone could contain. What he produced wasn't just a movie, it was a fevered dream transferred onto celluloid. But behind the golden mist, the radiant forests, and the horns that appeared to cleave the heavens, there lay disorder, suffering, and fixation. Each shot was wrested from sweat, scars, and occasionally blood, because while the illusion was easy to watch on the screen, the reality is that in advance of the cameras, nothing about Legend was easy. The tale that viewers finally got was not just one of unicorns, princesses, and devils. It was the tale of artists pushing themselves to the edge of sanity, a director risking his own reputation, and actors whose bodies and souls were pushed to levels most could only imagine. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Star Vault TV, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. It started with casting, because even fairy tales have heroes who are created, not born. Tom Cruise wasn't Ridley Scott's first choice to play Jack. The boy fated to tread between light and darkness. After Top Gun made him the most bankable actor on the planet, Cruise was only one of many names on a roster full of young nobodies. Johnny Depp, Robert Downey Jr., and even Jim Carrey buzzed around the part, each of them pining for an opportunity to make their mark. Each of them could have stumbled into the woods and assumed the mantle of the chosen hero. Picture, for a second, a world in which Jack was not played by Cruise but rather by a future Iron Man or a future Ace Ventura, two roads that might have changed not only legend but Hollywood history. But Cruise would not relinquish it. He arrived fearless. He plunged into icy water, into grueling rehearsal fight scenes, into stunt work that was crazy for an up-and-comer with so much to lose. He understood his career hung in the balance on being able to support this movie, and Legend toughened him up, instilling in him discipline, stamina, and the weight of responsibility. He was not merely acting Jack. He was demonstrating that he possessed the mettle to become a star. Across from him was innocence, seized not by a seasoned actress, but by a young woman who was just 16 and still at home with her parents. Mia Sara was pulled out of high school and thrust into one of the most ambitious fantasy productions in film history. Ridley Scott didn't desire polish. He desired purity, an evanescent authenticity that couldn't be manufactured, and Sara possessed it. But what she lacked was experience. She stepped onto sound stages the length of football fields, amidst prosthetic monsters under heat and pressure, and still had to conjure emotions way beyond her years. She would later confess that it had seemed overwhelming, a dream she'd wandered into without really knowing it. But that vulnerability lent the performance its haunting weight. She wasn't acting out being a girl between light and darkness. She was living it, trapped between child and woman, a human heart encased in myth. But if Sara portrayed innocence and Cruise portrayed determination, then Tim Curry portrayed terror. There was only one motive Ridley Scott even thought about him for darkness, and that was Curry's over-the-top performance as Dr. Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. If he could tickle people's funny bones, make them squirm, and make them shiver in a corset, Scott figured he could scare the pants off them as a demon lord. Curry dawdled. The script read grueling, the makeup intolerable, the requirements almost humanly impossible. But when he entered the horns, Scott knew that he had found his devil. Darkness wasn't merely monstrous. He was seductive, magnetic, playful, and frightening all at once. Curry brought to the role of velvet menace, a theatrical heaviness that made him not just a villain, he became temptation itself. But becoming that devil nearly killed him. 6 hours a day, sitting in a makeup chair, multiple prosthetics glued onto his skin, a chest plate, huge horns that needed to be balanced exactly. It was torture. One day, Curry lost it. Panicked, he attempted to yank the makeup away from his skin, and with the makeup, peels of his own flesh. Then he had to soak in hot baths for hours just to soften the glue so that he could take off the mask without ravaging himself. He suffered burns, scars, and exhaustion. But out of that agony was created something unforgettable. When he finally walked onto the set, he didn't just resemble the devil. He was the devil. Criticized later as one of the best movie monsters ever made, his silhouette, the horns, the smile, the fiery charisma, resonated across decades of baddies. From comic books to video games to heavy metal album art, Tim Curry's darkness became the template for screen evil. The world constructed around him was no less grand. Ridley Scott insisted on an enchanted forest so realistic, so fantastical, that Pinewood Studios constructed one in-house with coursing streams, beams of light, and trees older than time. It was glorious, and then it vanished. A blaze swept through the soundstage and turned everything to cinders. Millions of dollars of work down the drain, the crew in shambles and believing the production cursed. But Scott would not give up. The forest was recreated in bits, the dream rescued from destruction, though there were scars. That was not a set filled with puppets or special effects. Scott refused to make his fantasy artificial. The unicorns that shimmered through the fog were genuine Andalusian horses dressed with prosthetic horns. They bucked, bolted, and once almost made off down the countryside, horns still strapped to its head, almost persuading villagers that a unicorn had gotten loose. The goblins, the swamp witch, all nightmare monsters were created not of strings or stop motion, but of prosthetics applied over human actors. Some of the masks were so heavy actors couldn't breathe. Others took hours of makeup to just twitch a jaw. But Scott felt fantasy can only be believable if it feels plausible, and those decisions imparted legend with a physicality that CGI has few times equaled. Not every casting decision was easy. The ugly swamp, which Meg Mucklebones was nearly played by Rocky Horror creator Richard O'Brien, which would have turned the scene into a strange combination of camp and horror. Robert Picardo instead suffered hours in makeup to form one of the film's most abhorrent monsters. Whatever O'Brien could have added, fans still argue the scene remains unforgettable nonetheless. Legend, too, made history quietly. Despite all its devotion to old-fashioned effects, it did try something new: computer graphics. The shimmering pollen suspended in the air, the wizardly glint of sunlight through the woods, these were achieved through primitive digital technology, low-key but revolutionary. It was 1985, years before Jurassic Park or Terminator 2, and Scott was already merging prosthetics with the first whispers of CGI sorcery. But if the visuals were groundbreaking, the narrative was gutted. Scott's initial version was more than 2 hours in length, languid, dreamlike, awash in shadows and dread. Executives freaked. They demanded Disney magic, not gothic horror. So, they hacked it, cutting out whole sequences, weakening the tone, and even replacing Jerry Goldsmith's chilling orchestral score with an electronic soundtrack by Tangerine Dream in the American version. The outcome was 2 films. One in Europe with Goldsmith's pomp, one in America with synths and quicker cuts. The fans were divided. Some adored the synthy electronic theme. Others preached the orchestral sweep. But all of them felt something was lacking. The real legend was lost. It wasn't until 2002 that Ridley Scott's original vision returned in a director's cut, restored to 113 minutes with Goldsmith's score intact. For the first time ever, audiences saw the film as it was intended, slow, moody, and soaked in gothic atmosphere. Critics who had derided it in the past started to think again, applauding its bold ambition. But even then, sections of the film were lost forever, burnt or destroyed by bad archiving and neglect. Scott conceded it haunted him to realize bits of his dream were gone beyond salvage. When Legend opened in 1985, it was less a dream and more a disaster. Critics tore it apart. The box office entombed it. Children's adventure seekers found themselves presented with nightmares. For years, it was recalled as Ridley Scott's failure, his excess following Blade Runner. But then VHS arrived. In the placidity of living rooms, removed from the blinding light of critics and the burden of marketing, audiences found its trance-like loveliness. They shared tapes with friends, whispered about Tim Curry's Devil, and gradually, the film evolved into flop-turned cult classic. Its impact pervaded the shadows, but ran deep. Movies such as Labyrinth Willow and subsequently Pan's Labyrinth bore remnants of its dreamlike, gothic imagery. Computer games and comics aped its visuals. Heavy metal musicians inhaled its demonic style. And throughout, the towering red silhouette of Curry's darkness haunted, informing the aesthetic of evil itself. Even individuals who never laid eyes on Legend were familiar with his shape. For Ridley Scott, it was a nightmare that almost destroyed him. Sets caught fire, actors were burned, studios dismantled his vision, and critics belittled his art. Following the other misinterpreted masterpiece, Blade Runner, Legend was another blow.